we have something like 330,000 UK businesses that need to sell over the next 5 years, of which about 30% of those are owned by people working past retirement. And these are businesses doing $1 million plus in revenue. So they need to sell. And on average in the UK, 2,000 companies a year sell. So we've got this, hundreds of years of backlog, which is not going to be a good thing for the UK economy. If they all go to the wall, there's something like 160 billion a year in lost tax income for the Exchequer. So that'll set Rachel Reeves's heart racing.
The best guests on a podcast are those who have achieved immense amounts of success, and they're not fussed about people's views on what they say or do. Welcome to the Exiteers Podcast. Hey Gareth, absolutely delighted to have you on the Exiteers Pod this afternoon. Could you do us a favour and just give us a bit of your backstory, please?
Sure, Rach. Delighted to be here. Always good to see you and chew the cud. Love what you're doing with this pod, by the way. Much needed. So delighted to be a guest. So what was my journey here? Long and circuitous, it seems, in retrospect, but at the same time, like the blink of an eye. 20 years at the mast in industry, almost to the day. Started climbing the greasy pole as a salesperson in the organisation that I ultimately ended up running. But there was a long old journey to get there, bit of dead man's shoes. Thankfully, no dead men, but you know what I mean. When I joined, the company was doing a couple of million, and it was predominantly a sort of wholesale distributor of products for industry. So for metal fabrication, manufacturing, cutting, demolition, we had a fairly broad product range. But by the time I finished with it, 20 years later, it was 10x the size. Our margins had quadrupled, and we'd largely got there through chucking on substantial growth through acquisition. When I'd reached the sort of national sales manager level, halfway through my time there, we did our first acquisition, which, in retrospect, I ballsed up because
Good to be honest, mate. And we're a fan of that sort of language on this pod, so far away.
I figure you got to cut your teeth somehow and have the resilience to try again and learn from your mistakes, and that's definitely what we did. So I changed too much too fast, and it didn't have the retention that I was hoping for. But it was a fairly cheap deal, and it got us a bit of additional kind of foothold in a space that we later exploited. But in terms of the retention of the existing customers at the time, it wasn't as great as it could have been. But by acquisition number 2, we got ROI in 6 months. We had got like 85% retention. And we realized that not changing anything customer facing was probably the answer. And getting your cost optimization and your synergies out at the back, where that is not really very apparent, except to the ledgers and the accountants and the lenders. That tended to be the right way forward. So we did that a couple more times, by which point I was in the managing director's chair. So we'd agreed that this was our growth model, and we were rinsing and repeating some buyouts. And remember, industry typically still today has a vintage to it of ownership, wherein there's a lot of businesses that don't necessarily have inherent succession, haven't been run for sort of to be exitable, frankly.
Yep.
And so, doing a deal in that space was quite affordable and quite easily financeable. We continued to do it right up until the point that we sat down one day with a business that was of very material size and had built quite a nice war chest and had bought quite a lot of its, commercial property and had a very strong balance sheet and actually had banks saying, "You're not borrowing enough from us. What can we do for you?" Which is a nice accolade. And we said, why don't we look to crystallize our gains here? By this point, I'd accrued some equity in the firm. The founder was chair at this point and was, quite comfortable with the idea that this could be a good opportunity to look at an exit. So I ran a process, and we ultimately ended up selling after about a year of proper planning and managing that process, and having the necessary beauty parade, and picking the right party to run with. We exited to one of the Nordic permanent holding companies out of Sweden, who were a fantastic cultural fit for us, as well as they weren't the best offer. I imagine the best valuation offer came from a private equity firm that was looking for us to roll over a bunch of sweet equity and be a platform for a buy and build and all that sort of stuff, which we didn't really have the appetite for. We wanted something cleaner, and we didn't necessarily want the business to be put under too much pressure by a drive for extracting more cash from it, as PE often does.
Well, and I guess you'd done some of that, hadn't you, with the buy and build internally? You'd already hoovered up some of that and made some of those moves.
Yeah, we'd seen behind the veil. We sort of knew how the game was played from the other side of the table, and we wanted support to continue on our mandate. And so I remained with the business at that point. I was part of the sort of the deal. We had a bit of a deferred consideration, so I hung around to make sure that we were able to deliver on that and to manage a smooth transition. But of course, that was 2019 that we sold. So the anniversary of that, the whole country was going into lockdown. The whole world was going into lockdown.
I mean, we're not holding you responsible, mate, but good
No,
to,
I don't think
mention.
Correlation is not causation. But yes, I stuck with the business for a while longer because I wanted to make sure that it had strong stewardship through that turmoil, if you like, that international uncertainty. And at that time, did some more M&A for the acquirer as well. So bought another company, a power electronics manufacturer up in the northeast, and integrated that business into the group. And as we were all emerging from COVID, my son was born, and I decided that this was probably the opportunity to go and explore the world outside of industry. So I gave my notice, and we'd appointed my successors, and we did the whole handover, and that was it. I was off to pastures new, which was both a blessing, but also unexpectedly a moment of real self-reflection.
Yeah, and I'm very, very keen to pick into that a little further. One question before we do, Gareth. Your kind of, I know it's hard to sum up, key learnings over what's a decade plus. But if you were to look back over that journey, what are the three kind of really pivotal experiences, moments, milestones from a learning perspective over that over the scaling up, acquisitions, then exit of that business?
Yeah, I've spoken to the first one there about designing a playbook, if you like, or discovering a playbook, and settling on like this is the way forward to grow the business. I think that was a big pivotal moment for us. Otherwise, I think we'd have continued to eke out organic growth in a commodified, mature market where it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and it's certain products there was a race to the bottom on margin, and you couldn't really scale the company organically. So that was one piece. Diversification, I think, came along with that. So we started to broaden our wings into like tangential markets and product lines that were complementary and cross-selling, but actually came with healthier gross margins and more compound annual growth rate of the market itself, because we were just adjacent to our core market, which was a little bit sort of plateaued, shall we say. So acquisition, diversification, but also delegation. I think the third pivotal moment was realizing that you can't be, well, you can be the hub of all the spokes and try and, have all communications go through you and, be the sole point of strategy in a business. But actually, that is a massive bottleneck, and it stops the company from being able to achieve its potential. And, there was a day, I almost remember it, vividly, that that dawned on me that, we've got some really bright, competent, ambitious, capable people here that want more responsibility. And so the whole kind of culture of the business changed more towards, bring me solutions, own this problem, act on this, don't wait for instruction, ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And just empowering department heads more to execute on their mandate, and, giving them that operating envelope in which to innovate was just a massive game changer.
And I think all of us, I think plenty of us, when we learn that lesson, realise that we've been making it tough for ourselves for an extended period of time. And the art of delegation can't be, just can't be underestimated. I think the capacity, the additional, brain power being spent on the things it's actually supposed to be spent on. I had a people director years ago who said to me, Rach, every time you're diving in to solve a delivery problem, you're not doing the CEO role. And I don't think I took it particularly well when I first heard it, actually. But she was right. And it's, it's advice that kind of 10 years on still reverberates around the head on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think you go through this escalator in your career, and I don't think people are necessarily born straight into a CEO role and have all of the necessary wiring in order to be best placed to grow the company. I think that's very rare. I think you learn almost through an apprenticeship of the school of life, and if you're awake and you're open-minded enough, you sort of learn these lessons as you go, and I think through necessity realize you have to use the resources that are available to you and get out of your own way. But there was a period where I thought I knew best, and I didn't trust as much as I should. I certainly didn't delegate as a consequence, and only when I started trusting and empowering and delegating did the whole game change. And I almost wished I'd done it far sooner.
Yeah, you and me both. And in way of that exit, Gareth, for that organisation, was that, I'm talking from a very high level commercial perspective, was that a 7, 8, 9 figure exit? What was the size and shape of that as an exit?
Yeah, no, that was it was definitely an 8-figure exit for the business. We had some very tasty balance sheet, some really healthy profit. The multiples were strong, and I think everybody was happy.
And you'd had a baptism of fire there in way of some of those acquisitions. So if your strategy was acquire and the kind of buy and build, I'm always envious of people who have had a lot of that in their career, because there's so many times, probably less for me wanting to look at the financial side, but more I've been on the receiving end of the integration, being a right dog's dinner. And getting some experience around that. Sounds powerful in way of.
Yeah, I'm not convinced anybody gets that right first time. Integration is an art form and is often done badly. And you can protract the planning, or you can skip the planning, and both of those have pretty fatal outcomes. Or you can, do the necessary and do the work, be diligent, but try not to let it distract from the day-to-day running of the business, and hopefully there's a fairly optimal outcome. But I would say the buy and build was completely accidental. It began as a means to an end, I think people have called it a roll up since, or they called it a buy and build. I think the private equity company that came to look at buying us were calling it a buy and build because that's what they felt they could go off and do next as well. And it was a phrase that was foreign to me in my role. I'd done it because the opportunities had presented itself, and it just seemed like the logical thing to do in terms of return on time, return on capital. Yeah, it's only latterly that now I'm in the sort of corporate finance M&A world that makes a lot more sense as a phrase.
And that's the bit that brings us on nicely to that. And I know that there has been a number of stepping stones in between with Block Dojo and other bits and pieces. But I know, well, I'm an investor in your current business, so I know a reasonable amount about it. But it would be great, I think, to share, because in my personal opinion, you are developing a really game-changing way of buying and selling businesses. So it'd be great to share a bit about that.
Thank you, Rich. And it's an absolute honour to have you supporting us. So the business now that I'm CEO of and one of the co-founders in is BizCrunch. That was born out of Block Dojo. So you mentioned that. I'll probably just touch on it. I had the itch to scratch coming out of industry. I did a bit of angel investing. I invested in a couple of portcos that had come through the Block Dojo incubator out of Hackney in London, and liked it so much that I got talking to the team that by this point were on the sort of second cohort of their venture builder incubator program. As I do, much like you, a bit of a joiner, insinuate myself into things that I like. And before you know it, I got the job.
I've heard it described slightly differently, but joiner sounds great, Gareth. Let's take that.
Trying to be diplomatic, yeah. But we both suffer the same affliction. Yes, got stuck in, joined as investment director, and we launched 64 companies under my tenure over a sort of period of 3 years. Greatly enjoyed it. It was a fabulous cut and thrust. Met hundreds of fabulous both founders and then similar numbers of investors. We really built something special there. But one of the portcos that was coming through that was BizCrunch, and it resonated so much with me because it was trying to tackle the generational wealth transfer, the silver tsunami, the woeful reality that in the UK, 10 times more businesses go into members' voluntary liquidation every year than actually manage to get sold in a succession M&A. And that we have something like 330,000 UK businesses that need to sell over the next 5 years, of which about 30% of those are owned by people working past retirement. And these are businesses doing $1 million plus in revenue. So they need to sell, and on average in the UK, 2,000 companies a year sell. So we've got this, hundreds of years of backlog, which is not going to be a good thing for the UK economy. If they all go to the wall, there's something like 160 billion a year in lost tax income for the exchequer. So that'll set Rachel Reeves's heart racing. So they came and said, look, we've got to solve this problem. Here's a tech solution. And I liked it so much, I bought in and became a majority founder and started to make it a reality with them. And the product platform has grown significantly since then. We've got something like 600 active business acquirer users of the platform, using it to find opportunities and to manage those opportunities through to completion. It's been interesting being a tech founder and dealing with all of the fun of raising funds and managing developers and all the things that you've done several times in your career. So coming from the world of industry where that wasn't my day to day, it's been incredibly inspiring, and it feels like chapter 2 for me.
It's I do mean it, I think, that there is a massive gap. You've articulated it better than I will in way of how that market is serviced at the minute. And the platform and the service that BizCrunch offers goes a hell of a long way from a buy and a sell perspective. And there's additional functionality, features, services kind of cropping up on a monthly basis at the minute. What's the game plan over the next 12, 24 months?
Yeah, well, we wanted to sort of nail it in the UK before we scale it internationally, but this is definitely a global problem, or at least a developed world problem. I mean, we talk about 330,000 companies in the UK that need to sell in the next 10 years. In Germany, 125,000 companies come to the market every year to sell for this same reason. They have this Mittelstand, as we do, this kind of like lower mid market, but they have the same challenge of the demographic of the baby boomer generation retiring, and we see this in the States. We have plenty of inbound from places like Australia and South Africa and the Nordics, where lots of people are thinking the same thing. Like there's an abundance of opportunity. How do we find those opportunities? So the plan or the strategy is definitely to internationalize this and ingest more geographies and serve more customers in more territories. But it isn't just the data and the company sourcing piece. We've been busily building our own data room system, our own equity fundraising platform to help acquisition entrepreneurs to find the capital, if you like, before they can then go raise the commercial finance to go and do these acquisitions.
And I think that is so key, because the amount of entrepreneurs that you talk to who and like you, I'm speaking to plenty on a weekly basis. But they don't view acquisition as part of the growth strategy, and they don't because they haven't got the first idea how to raise. If they have been, if they've bootstrapped, it's a net new skill, full stop. But they haven't, I guess, had the option of raising money to acquire businesses and don't know that kind of path. So that that kind of bolt-on service and proposition, I think, is going to be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And obviously we've been doing some work with you on that too, and what you do for the sell side to help these business owners to prepare themselves for sale and run their businesses ready for sale, which I think is a critical milestone moment. To your point, if you've bootstrapped and you've run a business, because you're going 150 mile an hour in sales mode,
yep,
you haven't always kept it in the tidiest format for acquirers, investors, lenders to come and have a look at. And that change of mindset to get the books and the house in order before going to market is critical. And certainly with the sort of tools that now exist, I mean, we've ingested and integrated a lot of AI into BizCrunch, and a lot of integrations around being able to connect up companies into BizCrunch to then put agents across and pick out salient points that can then be turned into information memorandums and can impact or input into the documentation for the transactions. So it all starts with having something clean to work with, having the scaffolding of a clean, easily understood business. So I think we're both keen to tackle that problem.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And I want to just head back a little, Gareth, and talk a bit about the emotional impact post exit of the first business.
Sure.
So a topic that keeps on coming up, and that we've had kind of questions from audience around, is the that kind of nirvana that we all think is going to happen when we sell a business, and to some extent it does, because it creates freedom from financial freedom in to a lesser or a greater extent. But I'm very keen to understand the journey that you went on from a personal perspective after that exit, and how that kind of felt and how you navigated some of that.
Yeah, it took until probably about a month into my I'm going to call it period of reflection, to realize I was really broken. And I think I'd had a kind of I'd had the voices inside speaking to me and sort of saying, you might want to take a break here. You know, I think you're a bit knackered, mate. And I think that was definitely why I decided to take some time out and to be with my son and to step away from the business after, you know, quite a busy decade of growth and then exit and then like trying to be a good seller and a good steward of the company in the hands of the new owners, and then obviously COVID, and you know, we regrettably during COVID within the team we had a suicide.
Yeah.
And I was running up and down to Aberdeen and Newcastle with the sites that we'd acquired, and you know, trying to steady the buffs and, you know, manage leases and you know, retain staff and all that sort of stuff. And obviously we had furlough, and there was a lot. It was a lot. And I don't think I acknowledged it until I'd had time to really catch my breath. But I was walking around the town that I live in with my son strapped to my chest, and he was this like tiny little infant, and we were in one of the, you know, the baby Bjorn thing, and like looking like a proper modern dad. I was just bawling. I had a podcast on, and I don't know, I couldn't tell you what it was, but I wasn't listening to it. I was bawling my eyes out. It was a weird moment, but yeah, I then came to terms with the fact that I had some PTSD. I was, yeah, and I you know, my weight had ballooned. My personal fitness was at an all-time low. My mental health was hanging by a thread, and yeah, I think the moment of, you know, being able to step away, work out what I wanted to do next, I had such a feeling of I felt like I'd abandoned people. I felt like I, you know, it, I felt like my team, even though we'd found a fantastic buyer and they were awesome and their culture was fantastic, like I felt like I had failed them. And it was a very strange feeling to reconcile.
I firstly thank you for sharing that. I hear that a lot around the emotional impact, but also that feeling of helplessness. You know, even if you've matched, as you said, you know, the buyer's culture to your teams, and you've done everything, you know, as right and proper as you can. I guess my question to you is, could this have been avoided? You know, and I don't mean could you have worked less during that period, but is there a way that you could have got yourself in a more comfortable position for this? Or is that, you know, is that hindsight's a wonderful thing? I'm curious because it is such a common problem.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that too. What could I have done differently? And I think the conditions were a bit unusual, you know, because, you know, we were all, you know, confined to quarters, and you couldn't get within 2 meters of each other, and you know, that I think everybody felt a sense of isolation, and you know, mental well-being plummeted for everyone. Like it was not a me problem, but the me problem was that I didn't really seek help. I didn't share my burden. I felt that it was mine to wear. I think a lot of us as leaders are, you know, we have this duty, this feeling, this sense of duty that we, you know, you can't possibly look to share the load here. You know, what a failure you must be. So yeah, could I have done it differently? Probably could have had more humility, and could have. I think I would have benefited from speaking to somebody that had walked this journey as well. Like someone that could say, you're gonna go through this, because all of the M&A advisors were brilliant, but they could prepare you to a point, and the point is, it's all about the deal and the transaction, and you know, making sure that's the goal, right? No one necessarily talks to you about what happens post goal. You're flying blind.
One of the things that we have just changed in our program is to add an entire module around life and legacy for exactly this point. So having taken 30 companies through the program to grow, raise or exit, it became really apparent that there was a need for some additional support. And I often refer to this as the hippie module. But the reality is, it's asking yourself some of those questions. What are you doing it for in the first place? And what does success look like? And of course, there's stuff around the magic number and everything else. And I'm not disputing that there's an element of that being super important. But I think for me personally, it's as important understanding some of those emotional drivers. I feel, very similar to you in way of that journey. I think it was also similar time. I'm more extrovert, so this being lockdown routine and not seeing people, it was my worst nightmare. And I think I probably quite like an audience. That may be the biggest understatement of the day. But I can totally relate because that ability to be able to talk about it and, why am I feeling these emotions? Is this normal? Or, is it an indicator of something larger from a mental health perspective? But just having that sounding board, that kind of balance, that ability to talk about it, in my opinion, is absolutely key. And it sounds like that would have been a very useful thing for you.
Yeah, it would have been. I wonder about permission. I wonder about giving ourselves permission, like dare to dream, think beyond the goal. Like I didn't even contemplate the world post, and certainly didn't ask anybody what it might be like, or even give it a second thought. It was actually probably the least amount of forward thinking I'd done in my life. So I think there's an unmet need in the market, if it is a market, but it's underserved for business owners to plan post-exit, and not just what they're going to do with their time and money and freedom, but how they're going to feel emotionally, how they're going to reconcile those emotions. That I would say now to anybody considering selling, like find an ally that can help you navigate that, and you'll head off a fair bit of pain, I think.
I agree. I mean, I felt very lucky in some respects that I'd met a coach during the period that I was selling different, who we subsequently picked up and hired for the grafter. And we ended up building out, a founder's journey, and it's purely around resilience, emotional intelligence, and getting people in that right headspace and supporting them through some of this stuff. But it's stuff that just wouldn't be an off-the-shelf service from an M&A advisor. And you could argue, why would it be? Because it is very human-centric. It's much more about the individual. And with that in mind, Gareth, with BizCrunch, have you kind of thought about the future? Have you thought where the business will go to, and what your part in it will be over a period of time? Is that planning happened?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a lot of folks when you sell a business. I was fortunate to pick up a portfolio of interests, so some non-executive directorship, some consulting and advisory work. Bar a handful of those, which don't require a lot of time from me. I've kind of foregone a fair bit of that now, and have doubled down and focused entirely on BizCrunch as what I see to be, my legacy. I think there's a big societal impact here to serve. There's a big unsolved problem that I feel like there's an element of, and it's not just me, but my team. We have a kind of a calling here to do something about. I've also, very mindful of the fact that our investors have backed us to get a result, and we want to make sure we deliver that result. And that's not just because.
Yes, we do, Gareth.
That's not just because you told me to.
Couldn't resist.
No, but conscientious about the need to turn this into something really material and scale it. So, what does that look like? Well, yeah, I think here I am, mid-40s. I'd like to think this is something that, over a decade horizon, gets to a nice size and scale and value. I'm firmly a believer in talent development, and I'm very fortunate to work with people that I do, and constantly on the lookout for ambitious, young, capable, people to come and join the team. And they bring innovation, they bring solutions, and I'm very keen to delegate and empower and develop. So my hope is that that whilst I'll have a continued involvement, actually the business is going to have a strong team of young, ambitious, capable people leading it.
Well, no, I love that. And couple of kind of final questions. Couldn't possibly talk to you without asking about your thoughts on the where we are from a government supporting SMEs in the UK position, and feel free to add from the US viewpoint as well. Yeah, what's your kind of hot take on where we are at the minute?
My hot take is there's been an awful lot of money poured into early stage, and I don't think we have much to show for it as a country yet. We have a lot of companies that choose to list overseas when they get to material size, but if you look at the companies that do get to material size that have been beneficiaries of that sort of early state aid, and by which I mean either innovate money or the patient capital coming through BBB into some of the early stage funds.
Yeah.
BBB being British Business Bank, by the way. I don't know if we've necessarily yet had the best return on investment for that, and I think it's still early in the fund cycle to fully comment. But the problem we now face is that the cupboard's bare, the wells run dry, and much because of her own actions and the actions of her peers, Rachel Reeves has a big job to try and balance the books, and her cost of capital is getting away from her, and we have some massive unresolved issues in terms of the cost of government, the cost of social care, the cost of the NHS. These are some difficult issues that I don't think any government has got the stones to grasp and grapple at the moment. So there's going to be a continued, I think, shortfall in what can be made available to support businesses. Where that's deployed is a big issue, big question, right? We have this 160 billion gap potentially emerging on the horizon in the fiscal income if these companies don't find succession. The M&A process in the UK is both costly, complex, and protracted in terms of time, often because there's lots of vested interests that are involved. We're looking to be part of the solution, but the biggest catalyst that has helped solve some of this in the US is the SBA, the Small Business Administration.
Yep.
And their 7A loan scheme. And I will tell anybody that has a half an hour to talk to me about it, why that is a major lubricant for the US economy and how we are failing ourselves in the UK by not having an equivalent. The British Business Bank has the Growth Guarantee Scheme, which is a sort of rehash of the Recovery Loan Scheme and various different predecessors. And that doesn't go far enough in terms of its application for M&A, the size of the maximum lend, the nature or the orchestration of that funding to specifically achieve M&A as a goal. Too much power is given, too much decisioning is given to the lenders themselves, often whom apply very, very restrictive policies, processes, and interest rates to the product. So we don't have an equivalent here, and it doesn't seem to be on the horizon. I'd like to think that Jonathan Reynolds and others, in the corridors of power, are acknowledging this and looking at ways in which it could be addressed. But unless we do, and unless we find the money and deploy it accordingly for like economic continuity in this way, I do worry about dark times.
I mean, you and I have spoken about this plenty, but I kicked a post out today about why I think it's a hell of a lot easier to be buying and scaling businesses in the US. And the SBA loan piece is a game changer in way of being able to underwrite up to 90%, but also having never called in a PG against that is again powerful. And I wholeheartedly agree. And if we have got anybody listening in to this discussion, there's a stack of entrepreneurs that want a proper conversation with government around how can we make this, more palatable in way of, preventing people heading out the door, as we were saying before we started recording, whether it's Dubai or wherever it is. The amount of entrepreneurs that are exiting stage left at the minute is pretty terrifying. And that talent and innovation, it has to be encouraged to stay here.
Yeah, we found ourselves in a bit of a perfect storm, really, where tax burden has risen and it falls to a decreasing few to shoulder that burden for creaking infrastructure as a consequence of having been kind of the first major developed world economy to enjoy lots of the benefits that now are coming around for renewal or are no longer sort of fit for purpose in their traditional way. And there's a lot of legacy cost, I think, that the country is bearing that's falling on a few shoulders. So that coupled with compressed multiples on the valuation of your public companies here, that coupled with the less prolific, less abundant amount of capital being invested, it does put the UK into some pretty grim context with other geographies. Now, Dubai is a beautiful country and a wonderful place, but in terms of municipal infrastructure, has nothing on offer. That you pay for everything privately yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the transactional way that they run their economy. So it's not really a fair comparator. But I can see why people are enjoying the allure of it. I don't think it's a permanent solution, and I do see perhaps people coming back. This just feels more like a holiday for entrepreneurs rather than a complete divorcing of their citizenship.
And from a personal perspective, I love the place for a holiday, but it would feel like the Truman Show a little for me. And from a gay female perspective, I have to say I wouldn't be racing out the door to try and apply for citizenship, but we are digressing a little there. But I think we're both of the same mindset that there's a call to action, isn't there, in way of let's try and get some sort of leveling of the playing field to encourage innovation and businesses to dig deep from a UK perspective.
But it's an abundant opportunity, Rach. This is the thing that gets me. Like, we have some immensely capable entrepreneurs, some successful entrepreneurs. We have a huge stack of established businesses that need to sell and that can be picked up for sensible multiples of profit rather than crazy multiples of future revenue, as is the case in venture. The internal rate of return of buying an established company and holding that for 5 years is like 30%. And you're not going to get that through your S&P 500. You're not going to get that through your your indexes or anything on your interest on your money.
Lloyd's Bank either, mate.
Well, you're not going to get on the interest on your cash in that time either. So I think we're missing a trick by not focusing more attention and more capital on this space. And I think if we did, we would rejuvenate the economy and put ourselves in a fighting fit, style to take on the world.
And I think, I've heard this same opinion echoed. Rob Moore, Daniel Priestley, Stephen Bartlett, the infamous episode with Gary recently. There's I think there's a lot of voices saying the same thing. Gareth, I have a feeling we could talk for the remainder of the day, but I'm going to bring it to a close. And my final question to you, mate, is What are you reading at the minute, or what have you been reading that you would recommend to a fellow entrepreneur who is in the process of either, growing, acquiring, or wanting to sell a business?
So if you want to step out of operator mode and become more in capital allocator and asset owner mode, which I think, on the ascendancy, going from kind of like, staff to team lead to manager to director to, owner. I think there's this ascension that gets you to look behind the veil, look at the landscape, know how it all boils down to the balance sheet and what you can do with that. A really interesting read, and I've just finished the entire trilogy of this, is Adam Coffey's book, Coffey. He's got 3 books. I would start with the latter, which is called Empire Builders. He started, book 1 was the Private Equity Playbook, and I think then there's also the Exit Playbook, which is book 2. But his writing style is very engaging. He's a veteran, but also a polymath and someone that owns copious numbers of businesses and has ridden this and has been put in as a gun for hire to sort of turn businesses around and to do buy and builds. So he speaks from a very, real strong position of authority. But if you start with Empire Builders, it is a look behind the veil for those who haven't necessarily taken that plunge.
Yeah, I love that. And as an avid reader, I'll be adding it to the ever-growing list of books that roll up on a daily basis from Amazon. So I appreciate that, Gareth. And
got to get you a Kindle for Christmas, Rach.
I'm not the most patient though, mate. If it's a good read, I want to read it quick. I really appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much for coming on and chatting to me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.